It was the kind of silence that pressed against the skin, unspoken judgment wrapped in polished shoes and tight-lipped grins. Inside the oak-paneled courtroom, every seat was filled. Suits rustled, eyes darted, and at the center of it all stood Andrew Sterling, stone-faced, hands resting on his knees, as if bracing for impact. The judge adjusted her glasses. The air didn't move. The will of retired General Edward Sterling, decorated war hero and lifelong traditionalist, was about to be read. The Sterling name still carried weight in certain corners of Louisiana, especially among men who polished their boots daily and called their sons sir before they earned it. The general's death had made the local papers not for how he died, but for who might inherit the legacy. 2 properties, 3 pensions, 8 digits across various accounts, and 1 estranged son who hadn't been seen in family photographs for over a decade. When the lawyer cleared his throat, the room leaned forward, quiet, almost gleeful. One by one, names were called. His 2 daughters received vacation homes. His eldest son, the lakefront estate. Grandchildren were handed bonds and memorabilia. Applause was stifled but palpable. Then came Andrew's name. To Andrew Sterling. The lawyer read, his tone suddenly brittle. The son who chose a path I could never understand. I leave $1 U.S. No one laughed out loud, but the hush cracked. A few stifled coughs. One person snorted softly. Someone shifted in their seat too fast, like trying to suppress something inappropriate. The lawyer continued, flatly, so that he may finally afford a mirror and take a long look at the man he's become. Andrew didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just stared ahead as if the blow had already landed years ago. Somewhere behind him, a cousin shook their head and whispered something about shame. A woman across the aisle clutched her pearls in mock sympathy. The humiliation was precise, calculated, public. And yet, as the lawyer closed the folder and cleared his throat again, he hesitated. There is an addendum, he said, a sealed video message, to be played only if Mr. Andrew Sterling is present. Heads turned. The room tightened. The screen flickered to life. Static gave way to the dim interior of a hospital room. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. And there he was, General Edward Sterling, thinner, paler, his medals absent, replaced by a faded hospital gown. A man who once shouted over battlefields now spoke into a plastic microphone taped to his collar. If you're watching this, he began, voice rasping like gravel underwater, then I've already done what I never had the courage to do face to face. I let go. No one breathed. I know what I said in that paper will hurt. I wrote it when I was still angry, still afraid. But fear makes cowards out of all of us, even men in uniform. And I was a coward because I couldn't accept the truth about my own son. Andrew lowered his head, not in shame, in something far more fragile recognition. The general looked into the lens, not smiling, not crying, just undone. You were always brave. I was the one hiding, and I'm sorry. The screen cut to black. No one said a word. The lawyer gently closed the folder. There were still assets left to allocate, paperwork to file, signatures to collect. But none of it mattered more than the look on Andrew's face, a mixture of ache and release, betrayal and peace. In one breath, he had been disowned and acknowledged, humiliated and seen. And in that moment, there was only one thing louder than the silence of the room, the echo of a father's regret. If this story moved you, stay with us for the next part of Andrew's journey. Follow Heartstories for stories that heal, stories that remember, and stories that matter. There had been a time when Andrew Sterling believed in the structure of things, of fathers who stood tall, of homes with rules, of silence mistaken for strength. He believed in medals, uniforms, Sunday morning haircuts, and words like discipline, honor, obedience. His childhood had been built around the edges of these ideas, strict, defined, sharp. And at the center of it stood a man who saluted even when no one was watching. But belief is fragile when love is conditional. Andrew's coming out hadn't been dramatic. No shouting, no door slammed, just a quiet confession over a kitchen table, made with a trembling voice and too much hope. The general had folded his napkin neatly, stood up, and said nothing. Not that day, not the next. In the weeks that followed, Andrew's calls went unanswered. Invitations to family dinners were lost. His birthday came and went without a message. His name slowly vanished from group emails, family photos, Christmas cards. By the time Andrew graduated from architecture school, he was already a ghost in his own bloodline. He worked quietly, saved carefully, and built a life in New Orleans far away from anyone who remembered his father's uniform. There were moments, holidays, weddings, funerals where curiosity pulled him to search his family name online, just to see if he still existed in that world. He didn't, even when his mother passed. Andrew wasn't called. He learned of her death from a neighbor. 3 weeks after the funeral, he had driven home that night, parked outside the family house, and sat in the car for hours. No one came out, no light turned on. He never rang the doorbell. Because what do you do with pain that calcifies? What do you do when your own name becomes taboo in the mouths of those who once cradled it? So when the lawyer called to inform him of the reading of the will, Andrew didn't plan to go. It was his partner, Julian, who said it first. Maybe you don't go for him. Maybe you go for you. Andrew had expected nothing. And in many ways, that's exactly what he got. But that video, that low, cracked voice admitting cowardice, it broke something open. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack wide enough for light to enter. A father who had been silent in life, finally speaking in death. And yet, one question clung to him like damp air. If his father had time to record a video, to reconsider, and to speak from his deathbed, then why still leave only $1? Why go through with that final humiliation in writing? If the heart had already changed that night. Andrew sat at his kitchen table, the folded will before him, the single dollar still tucked in a velvet pouch. It wasn't even crisp. The edges were worn. Someone had folded it in half. Then again, he rubbed his thumb over the faded ink. That's when he noticed something else. Taped to the inside of the pouch was a tiny square of parchment, not official paper, handwritten, only 7 words. Library basement, you'll know where to go. His pulse shifted, because he did know. It was the old military base where his father once worked. Back then, it housed a training library where General Sterling spent his semi-retired years cataloging war manuals and old maps. Andrew had visited it only once he was 10 and remembered nothing but the smell of dust and metal. But it was a place, a breadcrumb, a clue, a issue. And the dollar, as he held it up to the light, he realized it wasn't a normal bill. It had been modified. Its circular seal had been embossed, reinforced with a faint metal ring embedded beneath the surface like a coin, like a key. Andrew felt his chest tighten, not in fear, but in something dangerously close to hope. He grabbed his coat. He didn't know what was waiting in that basement. But for the first time in decades, his father had left him something more than silence. He left a question worth chasing. The old military library had long since been decommissioned. Its sign was rusted, its windows clouded with years of Louisiana humidity. The guard at the front recognized the Sterling name and wordlessly handed Andrew a visitor badge. No questions asked. Perhaps the legacy still lived here, even if the man who built it had turned to ash. The main floor smelled of damp carpet and machine oil. Rows of shelves stood like sleeping soldiers, forgotten manuals and yellowed atlases resting in formation. A fluorescent light above flickered, buzzing faintly almost in warning. But Andrew's steps were steady. The directions had been clear. Basement, left corridor, back wall. The stairwell creaked under his weight. Paint peeled on the railings. He turned on his phone flashlight. Cold air wrapped around his ankles. And then he saw it. A thick steel door, half the size of a closet, recessed into the concrete wall unlabeled, unassuming, locked with a single circular mechanism where a keyhole should be. Andrew reached into his coat and removed the dollar. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he slid the bill into the slot, its metal-reinforced seal aligning perfectly. A soft click echoed in the silence. The door groaned open. Dust spilled out first, then the scent of paper, old wood, and something else, age, maybe, or memory. Inside was a simple wooden box, polished but weathered, resting on a shelf like it had been waiting patiently. Andrew lifted the lid. No money, no jewelry, no deeds or bank codes. Just three items: a faded black and white photo of a young boy on a man's shoulders, a silver military badge dulled with time, and a leather-bound journal, thick with ink and intention. He opened to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable. To my son, whom I failed in the daylight, but thought of every night. Each page was a confession, not of crimes, but of fears. His father had written about the day Andrew came out, how he had wanted to speak, to scream, to protect, but found himself trapped in the armor of expectation. The man who led troops into war couldn't navigate the battlefield inside his own home. He wrote about the letters he drafted and never sent, the calls he rehearsed and never made, the gifts he bought and never mailed, about the way he stalked Andrew's name online, the way he lingered on photos of his son smiling beside someone he never dared to meet. You didn't shame me, Andrew. You scared me because you were free in ways I never was. There were journal entries filled with jealousy, admiration, longing, and finally regret. Near the end of the journal was a folded sheet tucked between two pages, a list of wire transfers, amounts, dates, recipients, not in his name, but all directed to the same place, an LGBTQ youth shelter in Baton Rouge. The earliest donation was from over 7 years ago, each listed with a short message in the memo line: for the ones their fathers couldn't love, because my silence helped nothing. In honor of my son, for Andrew. Andrew stood frozen. The man who left him $1 had spent years giving thousands away in secret to people he would never meet, for a cause he once rejected. Quietly, consistently, no public redemption, no staged reconciliation, just silent atonement. A part of Andrew wanted to scream, another part wanted to cry. But what he did was sit, right there on the concrete floor of a forgotten basement, with the journal on his lap, the photograph in his hand, and a grief that didn't burn anymore but pulsed, steady, like a second heartbeat. His father never asked for forgiveness, but he gave a version of it first, not with words, with action. Andrew stayed in the library for hours, reading every line, every messy, crossed-out sentence. The journal ended abruptly, just 2 weeks before the general's death. The final page read, "There are things a soldier can't fix, but maybe a father can still build something from the wreckage." Andrew closed the journal and looked at the dollar bill again, still warm from the door's lock. He finally understood. It was never just $1. It was a key to a truth, to a man, to a goodbye he could finally accept. When Andrew returned to New Orleans, the leather journal never left his side. He carried it the way some carried ashes, quietly, reverently, unsure of what to do with something that had once been so heavy and alive. He reread it every night for a week, each time discovering lines he had somehow missed. The margins filled with hesitation, entire pages rewritten with a shaking hand, truths his father had never spoken, written with aching precision. But grief alone wasn't enough. Silence had been the disease, and silence wouldn't be the cure. So he made a decision. Andrew scanned every page of the journal, preserving each faded line and hesitant stroke, and uploaded them onto a simple website he built himself. The header was spare, no flashing banners, no statement of forgiveness, just a title: The $1 Vault. He wrote a short preface, his only words. This journal was written by a man who never knew how to say "I love you" out loud, but he said it here by Merck. And that's enough. He hit publish. What happened next felt like watching the tide change, first slowly, then with a sudden pull that couldn't be undone. At first, a handful of readers, former military kids, young LGBTQ teens who had been kicked out of their homes, parents searching for answers. Then came the articles, headlines, decorated general secret letters to gay son go viral. $1, one father, one reckoning. Within days, the website had 100,000 visits, then 1 million. People began sharing their own stories in the comments. Some talked about fathers who changed, others about the ones who never did. But beneath it all was the same quiet hunger for acknowledgement, for someone to look at them and say, I see you, and I'm sorry. Andrew didn't seek interviews. He didn't post on social media, but the story took on a life of its own. Then, one evening, as the sun poured amber light through his apartment windows, Andrew received an email. The subject line read, "We've been trying to find you." The message was from a woman named Evelyn Brooks, the director of Safe Start, an LGBTQ youth shelter in Baton Rouge. Her message was brief but loaded. I thought you should know. For nearly 8 years, a donor named E.P. Sterling sent monthly contributions to our shelter. We never knew who he was, but each payment came with a note. For the sons their fathers failed. She attached records of donations, consistent, generous. Every note included a variation of Andrew's name. We always wondered if it was for someone specific. She wrote, "Now we know." Andrew stared at the screen. He hadn't expected more. The journal had been enough. But this was a legacy. His father had never attended a pride parade, never posted a rainbow, never said the words out loud. But in the shadows where no one could applaud or praise him, he had built a quiet monument not to himself, but to the son he could not embrace in public. It wasn't absolution, but it was proof. That regret had grown into responsibility. Andrew responded with one line, "Thank you for keeping the light on," even when he couldn't. 2 weeks later, he visited Safe Start for the first time. The shelter was small, nestled behind a faded brick church. The lobby smelled like lavender and worn paperbacks. Teenagers lingered in the corners, some with bright hair, others with tired eyes. A few looked up at him like they didn't know whether to smile or hide. He sat in the director's office, holding a framed photograph of the shelter's early days. Evelyn poured him tea and said nothing for a while. Then she placed a folder in front of him. It contained the official paperwork. The board had voted unanimously to rename the shelter's new expansion wing the Edward Sterling Resource Center. Andrew was stunned. We weren't sure if it would be appropriate. Evelyn said, given his past, but Andrew shook his head. No, that's exactly why it matters. That night, as he left the shelter, the wind carried the faint sound of laughter. Someone was playing music in the hallway. A young voice rang out of tune but confident. Andrew paused by the entrance, hand resting on the new brass plaque still covered in cloth, waiting for the ceremony next week. And for the first time since his father died, he felt something that wasn't grief. He felt gravity, as if his father's absence had finally made room for something else to grow. Not pride, not peace, but purpose. The shelter wasn't polished. It had leaky pipes and flickering lights. But it had warmth, the kind that came from mismatched mugs, used furniture, and staff who remembered every kid's name even after they'd left. Evelyn led Andrew through the halls like he was a long-lost brother. Every few steps, someone would peek out of a room. Curious? No one asked who he was. Somehow, they seemed to know. In the back, a mural stretched across a cracked wall. It was vibrant and imperfect, a collage of names, rainbows, stars, and handprints. At the very center was a small quote written in black marker. "No one is unworthy of love." Evelyn smiled when she saw Andrew reading it. "One of our first residents wrote that." She said, "He aged out 2 years ago, but came back last month. He's training to be a counselor now." Andrew didn't reply. He simply nodded, his throat too tight to speak. In the director's office, she brought out a thin folder labeled Anonymous Donations EST. She spread the records across her desk. Wire transfers, each around the same amount, month after month, year after year. Attached were printed notes, the kind included in bank memos, usually ignored. "In memory of someone I never protected. For the ones who sleep with fear under their pillows. Because some fathers take too long to learn. Tell them they're not broken. This is what apology looks like. For A, Andrew traced the initials slowly. The last one was dated just 2 weeks before his father died. Why didn't anyone try to find out who he was? Andrew asked, voice low. We did, Evelyn said, but he always routed it through different accounts, different contact info, never a phone number, never a return address. She paused, then added, it's rare to see that kind of intention. It wasn't about recognition. Andrew looked down at his hands. There were so many things he'd wanted from his father: an embrace, an apology, a seat at the table. But in the end, what he received was something different. And maybe, in its own strange way, more enduring. He stood up and walked to the window, watching as a group of teens kicked around a soccer ball in the gravel lot. One of them fell. The others laughed, but someone helped him up. It wasn't cruel. It was familiar. I used to think he hated me. Andrew said, I carried that for years. Evelyn nodded. Maybe he did, she said gently, but not because of you, because of what he didn't understand. Outside, a storm had begun to roll in. Gray clouds tugged at the edge of the sky, but the shelter felt untouched, like a place built to hold against weather. Would you like to see the new wing? Evelyn asked. Andrew followed her down the hallway into a half-renovated section of the building. Fresh drywall, paint buckets in the corner, a soft smell of sawdust and possibility. This space will be for overnight stays. We're adding counseling rooms, a kitchen, and a small classroom. She pointed to a cloth-covered plaque by the door. We'll unveil it next week, but I think you should see it now. Andrew stepped forward. He pulled back the cloth. The plaque read, the Edward Sterling Resource Center for the sons, the daughters, and the children their families forgot. Funded by a father who finally saw. The words didn't hit like a hammer. They settled in quietly like a slow dawn through a frost-covered window. He didn't want his name on anything. Andrew whispered, no, Evelyn agreed. But sometimes it's not about what they want. It's about what they leave behind. That night, Andrew returned to his apartment and placed the leather journal back into the velvet pouch where the $1 bill had first been found. Not because he was hiding it, because it was sacred. Not a wound anymore. Not a debt, but something far more delicate, a truth made whole. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and began writing a new entry on the $1 vault. You don't need to forgive him. I didn't. But I understand him now, and that might be the beginning of something better. The memorial was small, by choice. No marble monuments, no brass bands, just a plain service in a local community hall, surrounded by people who had never worn uniforms but had survived their own battles, kids from the shelter, social workers, volunteers, strangers who had read the journal and felt less alone. Andrew spoke only once. He didn't quote from the journal. He didn't share stories of war or family holidays or the sharp-edged childhood he had grown up inside. He simply said, sometimes love doesn't arrive on time, but it can still be real when it finally does. He left it at that. There was nothing left to prove. The redemption wasn't clean, the apology hadn't come with a bow, but in the end, his father had tried, not with words but with action. And sometimes that had to be enough. After the ceremony, Andrew returned home to find a package waiting at his doorstep. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, no return address. Inside, carefully folded, was a copy of the original, well, not the public one, but the handwritten draft. The lawyer had sent it as a personal gesture. At first, Andrew didn't think much of it. He had read it before, and the sting of its language had already faded. But as he scanned the margins, he noticed something odd. In the lower right corner of the final page, beneath the formal signatures and notarization stamp, was a faint circle like a watermark, barely visible. He held the paper to the light. It was the outline of the $1 bill, and inside the circle, in his father's handwriting, nearly erased from time or hesitation, were 4 words, small, cramped, almost invisible. Please tell them everything. Andrew read the words again, slower this time. Not tell them I'm sorry. Not tell them I was wrong. Not tell them to forgive me. Just tell them everything. He understood then. The will had been a shield, but the dollar, the journal, the shell, the quiet money, the plaque, they had been the truth. His father had never been able to speak it aloud, but he had found a way to write it, to fund it, to leave it behind in pieces for someone else to piece together. And Andrew had done exactly that. He opened the $1 vault one last time. At the top of the page, above the journal scans, the news coverage, and the testimonials, he added a new line in bold. He left me $1. I spent it on a voice. And then, as he closed the laptop, he realized something else. This hadn't just been a story about fathers and sons. It was about what happens when silence ends. When anyone decides that the truth matters more than the pride it threatens. When someone spends the last of what they have trying to make something right. Not perfectly, not completely, but truly. Have you ever received something small money, a message, a gesture that meant more than it appeared to share your story into the comments? Someone out there might need to hear it. Follow Heartstories for more true-to-life storytelling, where healing doesn't always arrive loud, but it arrives.